That didn't work? Right. Okay, hi everyone. There we go. All right, so last time you were not happy with my graph because I didn't label my axis, and you were exactly right to be critical. Because everyone should always label their axis. So here it is. This is liter per 100 kilometers. And I should add, yeah, I have some other notes there. So so light duty trucks, they include stuff like, yeah, pickups, vans, and special purpose vehicle, but the weight limit has to be 8,000 pounds. So 8 tons. So there are, there's a weight limit on typical light duty truck. Otherwise, you fall into some other category, right? And so here we were. So just to remind ourselves, now we were discussing what happens if we have different sorts of damages. Yeah, so imagine that I have a high damage in some region and a low damage in some other regions. Here I put rural and here urban. And that I don't care about that, and I just cut in half, and I'm going to say, well, you have some uniform standard for both regions. And then we have seen that what happens here is that in this region there, so this, if we consider what happens in the rural area, then the marginal abatement cost is way too high compared to the low damage because emissions in this area are low. So then you have this dead weight loss that's going to occur. And in the other region, then you have the opposite. So here the marginal damage is very high compared to the marginal abatement cost. So we should have abated more. And if we don't do it, then we get some, again, dead weight loss due to too little abatement. Okay, so this is just said in words. So a uniform standard cannot be efficient simultaneously in the two areas. If it is set at an efficient level for urban areas, then EU is overly stringent for the rural area. And if it's set at the efficient level for rural area, then it's going to be not tight enough for the urban area. So what is the solution? It's tailoring the policy to heterogeneous situations, which makes it more efficient in terms of its impact. And of course, what we need is more information to set and enforce the standards. So if you just have data on more or less marginal damage, but you don't know where it occurs, then there is no way for you to set this region-specific standard. But if you do have more better data or more precise data, then it's obviously better. Yeah, and of course, efficient level of pollution can be achieved in both areas under the same standard. So in practice, do we have an example of this? Well, yes. So a concrete example are the low emission zones in Europe, in many European countries. which restrict the use of polluting vehicles um, in densely populated areas, so especially downtown. This is becoming quite popular. So what you're saying is, okay, if you're driving on the countryside, then probably in terms of, so here really the problem is not CO2 per se, because CO2 is of course something that's impacting the global warming at the global scale, but something like ozone or fine particles. So this is it can be very bad for your lungs. So if many people live there, small child, so it can be or asthmatic people, it can be very bad for them. So we try to restrict the use of cars in those places. A problem though is how it's been implemented. So, implementation problem. So often they restrict based on license plate. They would say something like, if your license plate is even, you cannot drive on Monday, Tuesday, or Monday, Wednesday. And if your license plate is odd, then you cannot drive on Tuesday, Thursday, for instance. Yeah. I would imagine so. So I haven't looked into it, but yeah, that would be the efficient thing to do for, yeah, because then you subsidize the city quite a lot, and it means that for you the marginal abatement cost, like not using your car, is extremely high, so you're ready to pay the price. So if you set the price well, yeah, that works. But so yeah, very good comments. So maybe we'll check. People can pick. To use their car anyway. But there is another problem with that. So can you guess what people have been doing? Yeah. Yeah, but so you cannot just yeah, just take a screwdriver and change the license plate. So you need to you need another car. But that's that's essentially what people have been doing. So they've been saying, oh, well, if I cannot use my nice low polluting Prius on Thursday, then okay, I'm just going to buy a cheap polluting car instead and go to downtown. So then it's been actually worse in some situations. So yeah. Why do you not show me my Yeah, so that's a lesson that economists learn the hard way. No matter how smart you think you are with your smart policy and your tricks, people are always are going to outsmart you anyways. So they're going to find ways to go around it. Or actually, you need to be smarter than them, and it's not easy. So yeah, and if people want to cheat, then they can. It's like anything. It's like fighting against hackers on the web or whatever. It's always a race between the people who set the rules and people who go against them. So yeah, in that case, the intention is perfectly good, but yeah, how do you implement this concretely? Not that easy. If you just say there's a, so what's nice about saying, oh, people with such and such license space cannot go on these days, but can go on these other days. It looks fair in some ways. It looks like you're targeting people for a random thing that could affect anybody, rich or poor. Com Contrary to what maybe economists would just say is, okay, have them pay. So there's just a tariff, and then everybody who has a low value of going to town, they're just not going. But then just rich people can go to downtown. So I guess that's good for commerce there, because very high-end boutiques are going to sell to rich people who can afford to go there in car. I don't know. But yeah, politically, I'm pretty sure it's going to be difficult to implement. Yeah, in Montreal, what they've been doing is just mostly making people's life very hard if you have a car. We have so the streets are narrower and you have fewer parking spaces than before. You have more bike lanes. So yes, if people are just if it's too hard, then you're just going to give up and not go downtown anymore with their car. But then you have now they're having some advertisement and saying that you should go to downtown and it's all good and yes, go back to work there. But people are all in their houses with Zoom and they don't want to take their cars anymore because it's impossible to drive there. Yes, it's a complicated problem, uh, especially if you don't have good public transit. All right. So that's it for different marginal damage. Standards with heterogeneous abatement costs. So this we've already mostly seen this. It's just a recall. So here is one curve which has heterogeneity. It's a marginal damage curve, but of course you can have heterogeneity with the marginal abatement cost curve too, which we have seen. So the problem is that to be efficient or to be effective, at least cost effective, you need to abide by the equimarginal principle, which requires that every source has the same marginal abatement cost at the level of emissions that they choose to emit. Otherwise, it's not efficient. Otherwise, you're asking someone to pay very high cost to restrict their emission, and having somebody who has very low cost of restriction not restrict all that much. Yeah, so, and if you abide by the equimarginal principle, then in that way, the total costs of compliance are minimized for a given emission target. So that's cost effectiveness. Unfortunately, authorities often apply the same standard for all sources. So again, the goal here is to not appear to be too stringent on someone and lenient on some other person, but if so, there's this always this trade-off or these competing priorities to appear to be neutral for everybody, but then again to be efficient too. So there's a nice quote from a French author, Anatole France, who said something like, "Oh, in France, it's forbidden for everybody to sleep under bridges and steal bread, for rich or poor. But of course, only poor people do that. So, but it's true that the law is fair. The law prevents it for everybody. Just for some people they don't care, and some people they do. Yeah, so uniform standard will be cost effective only in the unlikely event that all polluters have the same marginal abatement costs, which may not be the case. However, so measuring these again is not that easy. All right, here it is. So this is a bit like the solution we've seen before. So if you have, so here I don't say what the optimal abatement is, just that we have two different marginal abatement costs, one that is 60 minus 4E and the other that is 30 minus 2E. And if we apply a uniform standard of 9 tons per firm, then one has a very high marginal abatement cost, one has a very low marginal abatement cost. And the total with the uniform standard, so the total abatement cost, so if we have just two firms, one and so then the uniform, with a uniform standard, you would have, so one would be 12 times 15 minus 9 is 6 divided by 2. And the other would have 24 times 6 divided by 2. So here I've just added both. So 12 plus 24 times 6 divided by 2. And you get the total abatement cost of 108. By any chance, do you remember what was the best approach, the best thing to do in that case? If you wanted the same reduction. Not something that's super easy to see on the graph, but so of course the goal is to get as much emission reduction as before. So we have 2 times 6. So we have 12 tons of emission reduction. And what we want is to still have 12 tons of emission reduction, but to achieve that in a more efficient way. So what should we do in terms of standard? The what? Yeah, so essentially you could say that this is sort of a quota. It's a standard is like not even a quota. It's just a, well, it's a quota in a sense. So it's a limit that you impose, but you impose it on every single person. And what you would like is to impose a quota at the, so rather than having a fixed quota per person, you have a quota at the whole industry level, and then allow for each firm to abate the amount that they can, so that they have same abatement costs. Yeah, but then it's not here. No firm is going to decide it. It's just government that has the same standard. So I'm just going to show it to you. So what you would get is, so what you can have is, since I have two firms that both emit 9, so what I can do is increase the emission of one firm, but decrease the emission of the other firm by a single unit. And yeah, the optimal solution was, I think it was 7 and 11. If I can draw that nicely. And So again, the goal is to have 7 plus 11 equal, what did I see? Yes, so 11 minus 16, that's 16 minus 11, that's 5, and 16 minus 7, that's more, that's 7. Yeah. So the goal is to have the total being the same as before. So if you allow this firm to emit more because it has a higher marginal abatement cost, then this firm should be able to emit less because it has a lower marginal abatement cost. And then if you do that, then you get this nice equimarginal principle. Yeah, I think I had. Yeah, I think you get 60. So what you want is the marginal abatement cost of this firm or this segment of the industry being equal to the marginal abatement cost of this segment of the industry. So that way it respects the equimarginal principle. And then you want also that the total emissions. So here that would be 12 plus 7, which would be no, 11 plus 7, which would be 18, would be equal to 9 plus 9, which would be 18. So, yeah, it's not really possible to see that with their eyes. What we have is to compute it. So let's go. Yeah, so here it is. So plant 1 has old technology, plant 2 has newer technology. So marginal abatement cost for plant 1 is 60 minus 4E. And then for plant 2 is exactly half of that, so 30 minus 2E. And if I have a uniform mandate that requires 9 tons per year, then the total abatement cost is as we have computed. So 15 minus 9 times 24 divided by 2 for the first one, 72, and the second one is 36. So the total abatement cost is 108, but it's not efficient. We want equimarginal principle. So marginal abatement cost of 1 be equal to the second one, which is not the case. So so how do we find the best the optimal? So we still want the same thing. So we still want a total emission of 18. So that's the first constraint. E1 plus E2 equals 18. And second constraint is we want equimarginal principles. So MEC1 equals MEC2. So 60 minus 4 E1 equals 30 minus 2 E2. So then what do? I just use this formula that I substitute here or here. So here I substituted E2. So E2 is equal to 18 minus E1. And then if I do that, then very easily. So here I get 30 minus 2 times. So yes, I get 11 here. Yeah, so let me do that. I trust that people trust my computation, but just in case. Minus 4E1. So 2 times 18, that's 26. Plus 2E1. Yeah. 36. Thank you. Okay. Here I'm going to get, so in total, minus 4 plus 4, so I get 6E1 here. and I get 60 minus 30, that's 30. And then plus 36, so that's 66. So of course I get that is equal to 66. And E2 18 is equal to 7. Right, and the two marginal abatement costs are, yeah, I can compute one, for instance. Equal to 60 minus 4. Yeah, so that's 60. You just don't. So as long as you know what you're doing and you don't mess up, it's just linear computation. It shouldn't be too complicated. So again, now we're not saying this is efficient socially, but we're saying this is it is cost effective because that's the cheapest way that we can obtain a total emission of 18. All right. Okay. So anyways, we have done, I think, maybe the same computation before. So then what do we get as total abatement cost? So total abatement cost 1 of 11 rather than 9. So we get 32 for firm 1, and then of 7 for firm 2, we get 64. So you see that this is super, it doesn't look fair at all because initially, so firm 2 had a small price to pay for abating the emissions, 36, and the firm 1 had a high price to pay, but it's not what's efficient. What's efficient is to ask firm 2 to abate a lot and firm 1 to abate little. So firm 2 pays a lot and firm 1 pays little. So there's really a conflict here between quote unquote fairness and efficiency. So I'm going to put this here because if they are firm, then it's always possible to negotiate with them and give them money in some other ways or tax them in some other ways. But if you just ask them, this is the standard for one, this is the standard for the other, then it really doesn't look as fair. That's something that tends to come up in many situations in economics, this apparent conflict between efficiency and fairness. All right, so this is just what I've drawn previously. So then the efficient thing is to have both a marginal abatement cost of 16 and to have 7 abated by firm 2 and or rather 15 minus 7 abated by firm 2 and 15 minus 11 abated by firm 1. And then we get, so instead of a total cost of 108, then we get a more efficient policy that just costs 96. Doesn't look like a huge difference, but yeah, it depends on the example, I guess. Yeah, so this is just a summary of what we did. So if one producer has a higher marginal abatement cost than the other, then the individual standards are cost effective. Yes, okay, so then individual standards. So that's the key point here. Are cost effective since the same level of emission may be achieved at lower costs. So uniform standard costs more for a given target than the individual standard. But obviously, the problem is that regulators need to know more again to set proper standards. So they need to know more or less how much it costs to abate emissions by one industry or the other. So here, an example that we've seen 10 minutes ago. Do you remember it? Example of different standards for different people based on different abatement costs. I know that it was subtle, but we just seen it at the beginning of the class. Don't remember. So we have different fuel efficiency standards for different vehicles. Cars, right, trucks. And it's not a matter of different fuel. Here, it really is the same. Yeah, so here it's light duty trucks. So that's not like, because if it's just that one uses diesel and the other uses some other fuel, then yeah, it's harder to compare. But here I'm guessing that they use the same sort of fuel. It's just that, and by the way, anyways, some cars can use diesel as well. Yeah, so it really is a question of how much do you think you can expect different sort of vehicles to reduce their emissions. And yeah, if it's recreational or light duty, then you say, okay, I'm going to let you be less efficient and pollute more. So that's one example, but of course we can have many. Standards and incentives. So I've told you that a big part of big goal of environmental policy should be to provide as much incentive as possible for innovation, because that way you just make real progress that's just there and that can be used by anybody, even people who didn't participate in the legislation or in some country. And sadly, standards don't provide too many incentives for reducing emission, because they just set in stone what cars should do. So if you say, well, the law is my car should have this fuel consumption per 100 kilometers, then okay, well, as long as I abide by the law, I'm good. I don't need to do anything about it. So that's the downside of standards, is if you just set it there, then as long as you don't change it, then really people are not going to change. They're just going to use the cheapest way to achieve it, but they're not going to become more efficient at reducing their pollution. Yeah, so they have poor incentive to develop new technologies, because and if they are developed, then you hope that your new standard is going to come about and it's going to be useful, but you're not too sure. So and sometimes legislation are, as I said, there's a big channel of communication between the government and the firms. And so if the big players like, I don't know, GM or Chrysler or back then, or maybe Toyota now, if they don't agree with the standard, then it's going to be very hard for the American government to impose it on them, because they have very good lobbyists. On the other hand, there is one way in which they can be pro standards. That is, oftentimes very big firms, they have some they can have some leeway in which they adapt their technology. And so if they see some small firms that are just emerging but starting to compete against them, so what they can look at is, oh, okay, well, these guys are going to have a hard time adapting themselves to a new standard, but I can because I have lots of money. So now let's push the government to make them adopt a new standard. So that way, then I can crush my competition. Again, I'm being a bit cynical, but yeah, that's something that's been done, not just for environmental legislation, but any sort of legislation is sometimes firms look that like they're virtuous, but they're virtuous if they know that the law is going to affect them less than affect them their competitors. All right. So what could you do? Well, you could have something that's called technology forcing standards. So they are extremely high standards, which are very difficult to achieve. So you set goalposts very far in the ahead, and then you tell people, okay, that's going to be what you have to do in the future, so you're better adapt. So in this way, then yes, they are going to hopefully develop better technology. Problem is, it's not always sure that they do manage to develop this new and better technology. Sometimes it's harder than it looks. But yeah, that would be the effective way of doing it. Yeah, so but the thing is, of course, if you have a hard time developing the new technology, then you can just say, please, I cannot do it right now. It's too difficult. So please make it change the date at which I have to respect this new standard. So yeah, there are ways to negotiate. Yeah, so instead of so this is instead of investing in research and development to improve your pollution control, then what you do is you invest in paying authorities to delay the onset of these standards. So again, that's it's easily done in principle, just change the law, but in practice, making people move is not that easy. Yeah, so compared to technologies, to emission standards, so yeah, incentives, technology standard, emission standards create a positive incentive for research and development. So these incentives are weaker than other pollution control policies. We're going to see later that some pollution control policies are better, such as taxes and subsidies, for instance. Here's what you would have. So imagine that you have this marginal abatement cost. So you are firm one, and well, yeah, this is not firm one and firm two. This is marginal abatement cost one, and you could invest some money to obtain a lower marginal abatement cost. So get there. So should you do it or not? Well, the standard, imagine that the standard has been set to E1. So what would be the gain for you under the current legislation to change your emissions from MAC1 to MAC2? Can somebody see it? A, B, or C, or a combination of them? So, current standard. 1. If firm adopts its total abatement cost will be reduced by what? Not quite. A and B, not quite. Almost there. So try all the possible combinations of A, B, and C. So think about it. Okay. So now, what's the total abatement cost of the firm if its abatement cost is MEC1? No, we're under this standard here. So what's the TAC? What's the total abatement cost of a firm? Yeah. Yeah. So the total abatement cost now, one, I would say, is A and A plus B. So it's always the area under the marginal abatement cost curve. Yes, exactly. So if the firm innovates, then the new PC2 is just B. So yeah, so the reduction in abatement cost is A plus B minus C. So yeah, so now if somehow installing technology 2 costs less than B, then I mean less than A, then it's efficient to do it. So that is if you trust the government to keep the standard as it is. But then if the government looks at the new technology and says, oh, wow, you have a very low abatement cost now. So I'm seeing that, well, it's not efficient because marginal damage is this high and your marginal abatement cost is this low. So then what would be the new standard that the government should use after after the firm has changed to MEC2? Yeah, so now the new standard should be 2. So if the new cost is E2, sorry, MEC2, then the government should change the standard to E2, such that MEC damage. But then, as you pointed out, the new abatement cost for the firm. Total will B plus C. So then if the firm thinks, oh, maybe if I become more efficient, then the government is going to be harsher on me and impose a harsher standard, then I have to compare. Before my cost was A plus B. Now after that my cost would be B plus C, and I can even see that from just looking at it, it looks like B plus C might be bigger than A plus B. I don't know, but if it costs a lot to install the technology 2, then you should ask yourself twice before installing it. So make sure that the government doesn't just change the standard on you and make it even more costly to install it. So that's some strategic thinking that firms may have to think. So if the industry as a whole has a big abatement costs, then they can always complain to the government. Yes, but it's going to be so costly for us to reduce. So please don't change the standard. Yeah, but if your abatement cost is low, then maybe the government will set a stricter standard. So this is like if you were to ask, so at the scale of Canada, what should be the emissions per province? Well, in Quebec, we already have super low emissions. So maybe the government of Canada should say, oh, well, Quebec, your abatement cost is so low, you should abate even more. But then, yeah, we made a lot of effort in the past to build all these hydro plants. So should we be penalized for our efforts? That's a question that we should ask. And by the way, so in climate negotiations, countries do that all the time. So they say stuff like, yes, but you shouldn't ask me to reduce too much because I have this other reason why. So for instance, I planted a lot of trees, so please be nice with me. So yeah, always tricks to try to pay less. But would there be a solution to make sure that the plant A, well, okay, rather than that, let me just rephrase this. So if we have forward, how did I call it? I just want to have the same vocabulary. If technology for forcing standards is implemented immediately, is adopted. So in that case, what would the firm do? Well, the firm would have to reduce its emission to E2, but look at how much it would cost it. So it would be an outrageously high total abatement cost of A, B, C, plus maybe D, for instance. So it would have to pay all of this. So in that case, yes, as long as installing 2 was cheaper than D plus A, then that would totally make sense. So then, technology for is adopted immediately, then change. Yeah, so it all depends on the story we tell ourselves. But you see that if we already implement E2, then it's going to cost so much to respect it that the firm would absolutely be willing to change its technology. I'm going to remove there because that's a bit confusing. But so it depends on the story. Yeah, so just what we did there. So MAC1 is before improvement. AC2 after improvement. So if there's no regulation, no incentive to invest, there's no incentive or yeah, so of course, yeah. If there's no regulation whatsoever, then we just pollute as much as we like, and we don't invest in better technology. If there is regulation at E1, then for marginal abatement cost 1, so the whole technology, so the compliance cost is A plus B. If there's the better technology, so it's MAC2, and the compliance cost is just B. So then the difference is TAC1 minus TAC2, so that's A. So the area A is the amount of compliance cost that would be reduced with an improvement. So the firm would have an incentive to invest in research and development. But if that's the case, then the new standard, the efficient thing for the government would be to make the standard stricter. So if as a firm you pay to make yourself cleaner, and then the government asks you to pay even more to reduce even more, then so that's a more tricky aspect to consider. So you pay A, but you gain A, but you have to pay C instead. Right, you have A less to pay, but you have C now to pay because of the new standard is E2. So that's tricky. Yeah, so other things to consider: enforcement costs. So again, for standards, you need to verify that people do comply. So you have to install monitoring equipment, expertise of personnel, operation of the court system to sue people who do not comply. So there, example of non-compliance. Remember, we talked about this one. Again, it's always the car industry for some reason. Few years back. Yeah? Yeah, Volkswagen. Oh, how do you write that? Oh, gee, what did I do? Okay, Volkswagen. Right, no clue. So let's go over it. Volsk. Okay, this way. Volkswagen. Install. Yeah, software. Trick. Emission. I don't remember which fine they had, but I think it was substantial. Yeah, so stricter standard may involve larger enforcement costs because they require larger operating changes on the part of the source. So the more you ask people to pay, then the more they are going to try to avoid it. Sources faced with the possibility of having to pay a substantial higher fine would presumably have a stronger incentive, yes, to come. Yeah, so if yeah, so if of course if you charge higher fines, then they have to more incentive to come into compliance. But yeah, with limited enforcement budgets, what do the regulators do? They often rely on self-monitoring, where sources themselves keep the books on emission flows over time. Is that conducive to good behavior? not all that much, in my opinion. Every time you see it's self-monitoring, then so that's common for Canadian environmental protection. So important finds if you cheat, but if you get cut. Had something to say about that. Yeah, so, but again, that's not just in environmental protection. So that's in security as well. So a big debate among economists was for security for planes. So what economists would say is, yeah, but so we have such huge plane manufacturing like Boeing and Airbus, and they have so much on the line in terms of reputation. So there's just no way they're going to create unsafe planes. So we shouldn't really have to check them all that much because they're going to lose so much money if somehow their planes go down. Well, Boeing had their planes go down, and now still they're making money, but I'm pretty sure that they would have made even more money if they had made safer planes. So if some big company like Boeing can somehow make unsafe planes just to cut corners and make a bit more money, so you can imagine that companies are going to cut corners to not comply with environmental law. No kidding. Oh yeah, I've heard of. But so do we know why or yeah? So the two times it was because of some technology deficiency. What was it called? Yeah, some yeah. Actually, it was something that had to do with fuel efficiency. So it was the starting point was good. So they wanted to install nice efficient motors, but then yeah. So, but the thing is, so they had to change the plane too much, and that would require training for pilots. And then they said, okay, we're going to just install some software fix in case something goes wrong with the plane, and that way we don't have to tell anybody. And then the plane started doing all these crazy things, and yeah, crashed. Yeah. So, but yeah, initially the goal was to have a more fuel efficient plane, which was good. Okay, well, I should check what happened to that Boeing plane. Yeah. Okay. So yeah. So this is a problem with national authorities or local authorities. So in Canada, the air quality standards are set at the federal level, but enforced at the provincial agency by provincial agencies. So again, so yeah, if you compare how provincial agencies are going to work in Alberta versus in British Columbia or Quebec, maybe they're not as thorough in each province. So in principle, we have unified air quality standard, but then in practice, you have local values that are going to dictate the enforcement. Little thought is given to enforcement costs when a standard is set at the national level, but yeah, local authorities have to deal with high costs. Yeah, exactly. So standard may end up having lots of flexibility that might more flexibility that might first appear. So laws written at the national level are specific and apparently applicable everywhere. At the local level, authorities may be more flexible in their enforcement of the standard due to limited budget and pressure from local interest groups. But I should add that if the different we see are different. MV, it may actually be a good thing. If the federal government says, yeah, in Canada on average, that should be how clean the air is, but in some places it's just super costly to abide by this standard, then authorities are just not going to care. And doesn't mean that it's inefficient. If it's too expensive to care about it, then yes. Or on the other hand, if making sure that the air quality is excellent, but nobody lives there. So again, so if you care about human health, if there's some plant somewhere in the very north and nobody lives there, so if it emits a bit of particulates, well, it's not as bad as if it were in the central city. Yeah, so France is big on that. So if you go to France, you realize that everything is super top down. Everything has to do with, so this is the law. It's for everybody. It's like the king decides and everybody adapts. But every French person know that. So that's the spirit of the law. But then there's the reality, which is sometimes completely different. So in the end, they get similar results as, say, North America or the US, even though, yeah, in North America or the US, they have much more local things, but yeah, they know that they cannot implement these top-down approaches. All right, so these are some exercises. Again, we're going to do that maybe in 2 weeks. Yeah, I'm going to do them if you can. So just to make sure that you understand what's going on, then we're going to correct them in class when we're done. Yeah, so this is a case where you have different marginal damages. And that one is different marginal abatement costs. Yes, these questions are not too difficult. All right, so last questions, final questions on standards? No, all right, so yeah, so standards, now we have two last chapters, one taxes and subsidies, and the other is tradable emission permits. So I'm guessing maybe 2 classes for each, or maybe 3 classes for both of them, we'll see. And then exercises. And if we do enough, in my opinion, then I'm maybe going to prepare some extra material, maybe something about Canada's climate policy or Canada's environmental policy, which may or may not be super compelling. We'll see. All right, so just let me start briefly the next chapter. Okay, so these are by far the most popular sort of policies that are implemented for in the environment, and they are becoming more and more popular as people start listening to economists. So it looks like, yeah, economists know about these things. Have been known about these things for maybe more than 100 years, but now policymakers are really starting to listen at last. So what are they? They are so yeah, taxes and subsidies or transferable emission permits. So taxes and subsidies, they act on prices directly. So they set a price for pollution, and they let the market settle on the optimal quantity of emissions. So what you assume by implementing that. So assume that more or less precise, the efficient, the not the efficient, the cost of some quantity of emission. So if you know the cost, so you can very easily just add it to the whatever the cost is on the market, and then you just let the market arrive at the optimal solution this way. So that's a good way. But then sometimes you don't know exactly what the right cost is. So for the climate, it might be the case. So who knows what the real cost of a ton of CO2 emission is? Is it $50 or $1 or 100? It really depends on so many factors. So modeling the climate is just very, very hard task. But sometimes what you do know, however, is that certain amount of emission would really be too much. So you don't know what exactly the price of 1 ton of emission is, but you really would like to avoid going over that certain threshold. So this is if we know which threshold we would like to avoid. Example, 1.5 Celsius or 2 Celsius for global temperature. So in that case, you don't know what exactly the cost should be, but whatever it is, you know that you want to emit that quantity, not more. So it puts a limit on the quantity of emissions, and it lets the market determine the price of the emissions. So both require the regulator to put the program into effect and to monitor the outcomes, because you have to make sure that whatever people, so if they emit a certain amount, they do pay for it, or if there's a quota, then they don't exceed the quota that they are allowed to emit. Yes, under each policy, polluters decide for themselves the amount of pollution based on the price per unit of pollution. So economists like that. That's market mechanism. Efficient outcome. So they're increasingly being used, not just in Canada, but yeah, in worldwide, basically. So in the United States and Europe, so emissions markets have been in place for a number of years for different substances. So yeah, for sulfur dioxide in the US and for greenhouse gases in Europe. So that's emission markets. So this was especially to get rid of acid rains, and it was very big success. So it worked. Greenhouse gases in Europe, well, so we're not out of the problem of climate change, but at least it looks like now their emission trading system is starting to work. It would be nice if North America was willing to join Europe in their market. So we'll see what the future holds for that. And in Canada, so we lag behind. Everything has to do with Alberta, of course, so if you want to win an election in Canada, the vote of Alberta people is important, so you don't want to piss them off. So you cannot impose something that's too strict in terms of emissions, but still they're trying to implement a nationwide carbon price. So they started in 2000. They started at $20 in many jurisdictions, but not everywhere. And so per ton of CO2 emission, and in 2019 it rose to $50 per ton. So note that $50, I think this is Canadian dollars, so it's not US dollars, so it's lower than the Biden price of 51 USD, but it's not bad. So there's 70 jurisdictions, but they just represent 20% of global GHG emissions. So that's not a very large amount, but still there's progress in Canada. We're going in the right direction, even though it takes time. Yeah. Yeah, so the whole idea of letting people trade is that you're going to have a uniform price. So essentially, you have to choose. So you can have, for instance, both two regions trade on the same market, and then implement some carbon tax in region one over and above. Well, you could do that, but that it would really mean that people in region one have to, one, buy the permit, and two, pay the tax even if they bought their permit. So that would be yeah, exactly. So in Europe, the price is determined by the market. But in so in Canada, I'm guessing it's mostly has to do with taxes in many places. Yeah. So for instance, there's a tax on gas, but I'm not so willing to say that it's purely for environmental reasons. It's just that it's very easy to levy money for the federal government by taxing gas. So if I have more time at the end, I'll check more about what's happening in Canada. There is stuff. It's just not as much as in other countries. Sometimes even the US goes faster than Canada. Okay, so that's okay for today, and so we continue this chapter next time.